All right, welcome, Buff fans. Joined by Matt Smith, and it's spring break for the Buffs, but not for us, Matt. I mean, my kids had spring break last week. I don't know if you get a spring break. You don't have kids that are on spring break or anything like that. But are you taking a spring break?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I just spent like 4 straight days on the couch doing nothing but watching the NCAA tournament. So that to
Yeah,
me constitutes a break from life in general when there's just basketball all day long and you're sitting doing nothing else. And that's amazing. It's one of my favorite 4 days of the year. So yeah, it was a good weekend. But as far as like this week goes, no, I got some doctor's appointments, stuff like that to take care of. I'm this off season I'm working on my body. So trying to fix some stuff that I've been putting off for a while. So that's where my focus is at right now. And yeah, buddy, how about you? How's the fam family?
good. I mean, this off season I need to work on my body too for different reasons than you. But maybe this will be the off season of body work, I guess. But yeah, we're good. I mean, kids just continue being busy, and one son is at the kind of the start of his track season, his senior track season, and the other one is a freshman baseball player, and I think he's got at least two games this week. He's a C team player who kind of swings JV a little bit, and so
Nice.
I don't know if he'll get some JV time this week or not, but they always tell him to be ready. So he has at least two games. So yeah, it'll be an exciting week, and it's nice that there's no football practice to go to that I can kind of give a little bit more time to the family and things like that. So that's always good.
You got all summer for that. They're gonna be
Yeah.
sick of you by the end of the summer. That's all I know.
By the end of the summer, I think they've been sick of me for years,
Already,
Matt.
already.
A long time. Um,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
we haven't done one of these. Last week was kind of crazy, so we didn't have a chance to do it. But
It was
um,
just a weird schedule too. I
yeah, it
mean,
was a weird
it was
schedule.
the way everything lined up. We thought it'd be better if we just waited a week. We have tons to
Yeah.
get into now, though.
Well, and we usually do this on a Sunday night or Monday, but Coach Prime actually went on Monday. They kind of switched the schedule last week.
Yeah.
They went Monday, Tuesday instead of Tuesday, Thursday because Coach Prime wanted to take a couple of days off and go down to the Big 12 Pro Day, which totally understand that. And so we decided to wait a week, but that gives us a lot to talk about. And we've talked to plenty of coaches, including Coach Prime, and we want to give our takeaways from that, Matt. But I do want to start with sort of I guess a newsy item, a couple of newsy items, but um, the topic over the weekend was the fact that something that Coach Prime said last Monday, which to me it was funny when he first said it. My thought was, yeah, that's a cool idea for the future. When he talked about wanting to play another team um, in the spring game, and you go back and listen to him like, no, I think he's talking about this year. And like, but it's not going to happen because the NCAA rules don't allow it. Now all of a sudden, they're actually petitioning to try to get this to happen. Later on Monday, to recap for everybody, later on last Monday, Syracuse coach Fran Brown, saw a clip of that, retweeted it, and said, "Hey, coach, we'll come out to Boulder for 3 days." And as it turns out, as the week went along, CU and Syracuse reports, and I'll be able to confirm it, that both of them have filed the paperwork to the NCAA to try to change the rule and try to come together on April 19th in Boulder for a spring game.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, he brought this up last year.
Yeah,
This wasn't a new idea that he had just had. He's been thinking about doing something like this for a long time. And
yeah,
typically, when we hear about it, sometimes I'd say sometimes it's a little bit spur of the moment, but typically when we hear about it, he's been thinking on it for a little while. So this is something that he's thought about, and certainly I'm sure logistically how it might work. And at CU, they actually have the facilities that you're able to host something like this. There's multiple different practice fields. If for some reason, you decided after doing one day of joint practices that, hey, actually we don't want to do the second day, but we'll do the spring game, you could split them up because you've got literally three different areas where you could go.
yeah,
There's tons of space. And first of all, in the day and age when people like Matt Rule, Nebraska's head coach, and Steve Sarkisian and other folks like that are canceling the spring game because they don't want other teams to get a look at their, guys lower on their depth chart who they're saving, et cetera, for reasons that really don't have anything to do to benefit the student athlete, right? It's not like, hey, we're going to cancel the spring game because it's actually good for the kids not to have that opportunity to practice in front of fans, and it's actually good for the fans. No, it's more out of fear, right? And
yeah,
Coach Prime's basically saying, who cares?
Right.
This is football. This is how it works. We're here to compete. And obviously, we all love it from a fan perspective. Having meaningful football any other time of the year outside of the actual season would be really, really great. And I think it would be a nice way to mix it up. I actually think you're going to have a lot of programs. Even Joey McGuire, head coach at Texas Tech, offered to do it. He was like, "Yeah,
Mhm.
you guys come down here to the Star."
Yeah.
I don't think that's how it's going to go. We've been kind of poking around it behind the scenes. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't somebody mention to you that it was one of those situations where maybe you wouldn't have to get on a plane if you were going to get it approved? Wasn't that something like that, a
Well, no, it's
stipulation?
it's more of like just in talking, with people like speculating on how it could happen.
Right,
Is that like from what I understand, like the soccer team at CU, like they'll have a spring schedule, right? The
right.
volleyball team has a spring schedule, but I think the NCAA rules on things like that are that you can do a spring schedule,
A
but you can't get
scrimmage,
it.
you
But
mean,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
like it's like a 5 or 7 game spring schedule, something like that. But you can't get on a plane, so it's something that you can bus to. And so, CU soccer typically will play in the spring. You might see them, go down to UCCS or Air
right.
Force and CSU, things like that. They're going to play in-state teams, and the volleyball team I think is this spring is playing like Nebraska. You can bus to and from Nebraska, and so things like that. The cross country thing is kind of interesting.
Which is honestly, sorry, not to interrupt, but it's honestly arbitrary in and of itself, that rule. You know what I mean? If you really think
Well,
about it, there's really no meaning behind it.
well, I would say there is because of the travel strain on athletes, and it's more of something that like
It's one game in the spring.
I know that, but I mean like let's say soccer, right?
Okay.
If CU soccer was to have a spring game against CSU, well, you could drive up to Fort Collins that afternoon, play the game, come home. Well, if you did that with
No,
Syracuse,
I
you'd
understand.
have to fly one day, play one day, fly home, and so I think that's the big
My
part of
point
it.
is, it's just really arbitrary, though. Like, yes, you would have to, but
Yeah,
I mean, who's even calling the shots anymore? Like, I'm surprised they even petitioned the NCAA right now.
yeah,
Obviously, I speak in jest, but obviously, a cool idea just to kind of put a cherry on top until we hear about it. I don't know when we're going to hear about it. The NCAA has so much going on right now. For them to go, yeah, you guys can go ahead and we can start a whole new thing that we've never done before, it would surprise me
yeah,
if they actually say yes right now. I hope they do say yes because it's a great idea.
yeah,
It puts eyeballs on the sport, but because it wasn't theirs, probably in part, and I don't know. I find it hard to believe in the middle of trying to sort out how the entire structure of college football is gonna, or not just college football, college athletics on the whole. For this upcoming season is going to operate. We don't even know yet. And I
yeah,
feel like that's where their focus is going to be. So I would say it would probably be out of character for them to give them the waiver to do this. But let's hope that they do something out of character because it would be
yeah,
a great product for everybody. And the one, let's talk about it from a coaching perspective real quick. From a coaching perspective, you lose all perspective when it's buffs on buffs for 4 weeks. Like you really have a hard time sometimes telling what you have in X player or Y player, and then you see him go against some other guys, but you need
mhm,
it to be comparable competition. It can't be like I know somebody brought up on social media Norfolk State, and I was like, yeah, I mean that's a nice story, and I understand bringing that up with Michael Vick and everything, and I think that's really cool. But at the same time, what does that do for you as a program? You're not gaining anything out of playing a Norfolk State. You get a false positive. If the point is to evaluate players against others, right, and
mhm,
to not get bored, you would want legitimate competition because it doesn't count and it's a test. And you can
yeah,
really tell who is who. And so I love that Syracuse is a program that I think fits that bill perfectly. I have tons of respect for Fran Brown as a coach. I think he's fantastic. He did a wonderful job last year. He and Coach Prime would be a really cool, like dynamic duo to lead the charge here.
mhm.
And yeah, I mean, we could talk about this for like an hour, but it's a cool idea. We'll see if it comes true.
Yeah. I mean, I'm like you in that I would be surprised if it got approved for this year.
Yeah.
My guess, and who knows? I mean, the NCAA is so fragile right now, and they're being attacked from so many different areas that maybe they're just like, whatever. We don't want. This is not a
We
thing
just don't have time for
we don't have
this.
time to deal with this. Just
Yeah.
do it. Whatever. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Maybe that would be
Maybe,
the hope, right? Yeah.
but my guess is that this would be such a big change from what's not been done or been done, I guess.
Right.
That my guess is that there's a lot of coaches around the country that like the idea, but it's like to bring this up less than or a month away from the event. Let's look at this for 2026. My guess is that they would allow something starting in 2026, but say hold off on this for now and let's reevaluate this for next year. And because it seems to me like it's something that would need to go to a vote to the NCAA committees. I mean, the football committees. The competition committee, the rules committees, things like that. It doesn't seem like it's something that could just be here's a waiver and then yeah, sure, you two go do it. It seems too big for that.
Or
Um,
they just say, screw it. Honestly, at this point, the entire sport's changing. We're experimenting.
yeah,
You guys want to do it? Go with it. And we'll
yeah,
use you as a guinea pig in this experiment. And if it works well, I'm sure we'll have multiple schools doing it.
yeah,
But look, I mean, you're going to have, national exposure. And if you could put this on, we don't get much football other than the USFL and the XFL. So you're
right,
going to have eyeballs on it. It makes a lot of sense in that regard. And yeah, look, this is just another example of not even 3 full years, just 2 full years into his coaching career, Coach Prime has become, in my opinion, the biggest needle mover among his peers organically.
yeah,
Organically, it wasn't given to him. I mean, sure, his celebrity status brought eyeballs,
yeah,
but it's the tangible things that he's actually brought to the sport. The fact that overnight he helped develop a brand new way to construct a program. And it's been so revolutionary that it's been copied almost instantly to the
yeah,
point where you would have a hard time tracing it back to primarily him. Like it's
yeah,
been done in some aspects. Nobody ever did it like he did it. And obviously, with his stature and status, he made it mainstream.
yeah,
And you just again, you could go an entire career, like, no offense to Mike McIntyre, okay? He's won an AP National Coach of the Year, right? I mean, he has a 10-win season. His legacy on the game of college football won't be nearly what Deion Sanders was.
yeah,
And that says so much about, first of all, obviously, you get the eyeballs because you're the celebrity. But if they had done nothing with it, if they don't win 9 games last year, if there weren't actually results behind it, Brian, they would have laughed him out of the building because they were all
right,
ready to. They were
yeah,
all ready to. And so you just have to tip your cap and go, this is a visionary and a forward thinker. And when it comes to people who should be in the room, okay, when decisions are made about the future of the sport, he's someone that I would classify as deserving to be in that room and having his voice heard based
yeah,
upon what he's brought to the table. He's moving the sport forward in a in a in a world that is so traditional and entrenched in the ways of yore in college football and college athletics, unapologetically and also logically and intelligently, that I got to thinking about, hey, 5, 10 years down the line, 20, 30 years, he'll have been one of the vehicles that has moved the sport forward into the modern era.
yeah, yeah. I agree with you, and I mean, there's a lot of way he's done it, and if this happens, you have to attribute it 100% to Coach Prime. And I will say, uh, one way that I think it could happen this year is what drives college football more than anything right now.
Dinero?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
TV, right?
Hmm.
And CU's spring game, which is just also we haven't talked about this, but like that game, if it happens, would be April 19th. That's when CU spring game is. It's
Yeah.
currently slated for ESPN too. So if this could be something that ESPN looks at and says, yeah, we want this because like what you said before, Matt, was that there's really no football on right now. And so if ESPN could get a Colorado Syracuse spring game on TV, heck yeah, I think they'd go for that. And so ESPN might be one of the drivers to help them get this going here. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with it. I do think it's going to happen um, at the very by 2026. I don't know if it happens this year. I do think by next year, I think it's going to be allowed.
And I agree with you for two reasons. you just brought up ESPN. They just dropped baseball. So they are in need of programming over the summer, and that's a
Yeah.
layup. That's an easy one, and
Yeah.
that'll do better than baseball. So
Mhm.
you're 100% correct there. I feel like while we were on the topic of Coach Prime changing the landscape of college football, there's plenty of other things that kind of go with it, but one of them is the coaching staff that he's put together.
Mhm.
And that was, coming out of year one, our question was, okay, he missed on OC, at least the fit, right? And he would acknowledge as much, which is why he made the demotion mid-year.
Yeah.
And Charles Kelly, I don't think was the right guy either. I think he might have been the right guy to recruit at the outset, right? He came in with an established reputation, and I don't think he was a bad coach. I just don't think he was a great fit here with this coaching staff.
Mhm.
And that over the last couple of weeks has been really impressive because, and I know we're about to get into it, but to see the transformation from what Colorado has been to what they are now coaching staff wise, I think we're a little normalized to it, but we really shouldn't be because we've never quite seen anything like this when we're talking about three different Hall of Famers on staff. We're talking about
Yeah.
kind of like an atmosphere where Coach Prime has, created this NFL clubhouse,
Yeah.
right? This NFLU clubhouse where, and I think for him it's great too because he brings his friends into the fold, Brian. Now you don't have your sons there. You even have more of guys, kind of a locker room culture in the building, and now that you can have as many assistants and coaches you want, why not? I mean, if these
Yeah.
guys want the job, I mean, for a guy like Byron Leftwich, who we'll talk about as well, like that's for from the program's perspective, if you feel like that's a good fit, that's a layup.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, there's plenty of changes he's made that you look at and say, yeah, a lot of these make sense. And it's crazy how um sort of the how we view coaching staffs changes because in the past with previous head coaches, when they make hires, a lot of the when the fans talk about it, a lot of it would be like, "Ugh, I don't like this hire. He doesn't have college experience, you know. And now Coach Prime's like, I don't care. This guy doesn't have any coaching experience, but he was the Hall of Famer, so I'm going to bring him in here, and people love the hire. Um, we're going to talk about coaching, but I do want to say one last thing on the Syracuse idea is that the other thing I love, Matt, is that both coaches talked about there's going to be more to it than just practicing with each other in the spring game. Is they want to do like financial literacy classes. They talk about academics together. So um, if you're Fran Brown, why wouldn't you want to bring your team out here to have your guys here from Warren Sapp and Marshall Falk? And you know, I guarantee you, if those two teams are coming together, Coach Prime is going to bring in other people. Terrell Owens. However many,
Michael
just
Irvin, yeah,
list off his buddies that
yeah.
he could bring in there and talk to both those teams. So I think it's a great idea in a lot of respects. But anything else on that Syracuse idea before we move fully on to talking about the coaching staff?
Have you ever covered an NFL joint practice?
I did, yeah. Years ago, I covered the Broncos, and I want to say, yeah, it was the Cowboys. It was the
Yeah.
Cowboys were in town.
Yeah, they're fun. They're
Yeah.
really fun. And it does provide you an opportunity to really go up against somebody else and kind of see what you have preliminarily. It's not going to be one of those situations where, oh, well, we saw him against, Syracuse in the spring game, so we
Mhm.
know he's going to be the starter at that position, especially not in college. I would imagine it would be even more toned down. But, right, there's opportunities for adversity with getting into fights because scraps come with spring games and playing against other people. But to your point, and not only that, putting a highlight on two African American coaches who are not only succeeding, but they are leading in the sport, right? In
Yeah.
in a profession that is dominated by white males. Here you have two strong black men out in front of the pack innovating, and that
Yeah.
should be championed. And I think for them, obviously it's a toss in with the academic and the financial literacy stuff to kind of help sway the NCAA, but that's not what it's really about. It's about actually giving that back to the kids. And I was listening to Fran Brown's comments about how I think it's what did he call the program? Syracuse in 60, where within 60 days of you graduating, he promises to help get you a job offer with
Yeah.
inside your major,
Yeah.
which is I know guys at CU from coaches who are still and are not there anymore would have died and gone to heaven had their coaches cared about them enough to actually
Yeah.
go out of their way to do that. So You don't see a lot of that stuff at other programs, right? Like I mean, just this week we saw what happened with Georgia. What is it, 27, 28 players in the last 3 seasons now arrested? It's embarrassing that hasn't received more media coverage, actually. It's
Yeah.
it's really bad. Like, where is the
No,
athletic
but
piece
it's the Buffs
on
that
that?
have the
Yeah,
Grand
I
Theft
know.
Auto culture, right?
No, yeah, well, we left that problem in 2024.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
We don't need to talk
yeah.
about that.
It is crazy. It's a double standard, that's for sure. But
It's
I agree
ridiculous.
with you totally.
It's embarrassing.
I think the idea is awesome. I'm skeptical of whether they can pull it off in less than a month at this point. But it'd be cool if they do. I do think it'll happen by 2026, however. So yeah, us move on to the coaches because throughout the first 2 weeks of spring ball, that's mostly what we've heard from. We've heard from a few players, DJ McKinney, Jordan Seaton. We heard from all the quarterbacks in week one, but mainly we've heard from a lot of coaches and a lot of the new coaches. And just, do you have a blanket takeaway, or do you kind of want to talk about specific guys?
No, I think that Coach Prime is a lot more comfortable. I think he knows a lot more of what he's looking for right now. And I was thinking in many different ways about, the way he goes about bringing only pro guys. When you're bringing in players from the transfer portal, one thing you need in a talent evaluator is somebody who can watch some snaps and go yes or no,
Mhm.
right? Like somebody who's got it like that. Sometimes it's easy. I mean, and look, it's not exclusive because Gunnar White, their new offensive line coach, never really played, and so he clearly has earned the trust. There are plenty of exceptions to the rule, right? Like I
Yeah,
never played high major college basketball. I consider myself, to be a good skills trainer, right? Like you don't have to have those exact same those exact same experiences. And I will say that Coach Prime has brought in some really intelligent people. And one thing that I have noticed is the character in this program continues to rise year after year after year. And
yeah.
I'm talking about, I was thinking about this as we listened to George Hegeman. And one of our colleagues asked him about, bringing in IMG kids because clearly they brought in McPherson and help me out. Who's the other one I missed?
London Merritt,
London Merritt. Right. They brought in those two kids and
Jordan
with
Seaton,
Seaton
Cash
last year, and
Cleveland.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so the one thing that I'll say is much like his approach to recruiting, I think he's really narrowed down what he wants staff wise. And I say that because when you talk about freshmen, like Cormani came in, but Cormani may not have been ready yet, like up here,
Yeah.
right? Maybe he
Mhm.
is now. It looks like he's doing well down there in Florida, and we're all thrilled for him. So is Coach Prime. He talked about that, even if Cormani said some bad things about him after he left because he was bitter and 18 and didn't
Yeah.
understand some things.
Right.
But you don't see this coaching staff going after projects or guys that, hey, look, maybe it'll take them a year to kind of grow up. Yes, but they have some real character behind them, and it's not that those other kids didn't. I don't want to make it seem like that, but it kind of looks the same to me when we look at new coaches, right? Like Marshall Falk. You're not going to bring in a guy who's never coached before unless he's a Hall of Fame running back. Deion Sanders
Right.
wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And you're just seeing the quality of person and player, I think, elevate with both the recruiting classes and with each cycle of the coaching staff. I
Mhm.
think this has the potential to be the best staff yet, quite frankly, and by
Yeah.
a large margin.
Yeah. I agree with you. And yeah, I mean, I've coached as much football almost as Marshall Falk, which is not a lot, and but Marshall Falk's much more qualified to coach this than I am. Yes, if you're going to bring a guy in, bring in the Hall of Famer. Warren Sapp was the same thing. He had not coached before last year,
Right.
but look at the difference he made last year. And every one of those defensive linemen we talked to talked about how much they learned from Warren Sapp. And Warren Sapp was one of the guys we've talked to in the last couple of weeks. When we listened to him last week, I don't know about you, but I loved listening to him talk about coaching and kind of what he's learned about being a coach in the last year. And I asked him even, were you coachable? And he talked about some of the how he's maybe a little bit different as a coach than he was as a player, and it kind of took off a little bit the comment he made to me about coaching Tafik Thomas,
Yeah.
and how he wasn't getting through to Tafik, and it was kind of bothering him and annoying him, and he kind of decided, you know what, I'm going to go to his level, and all of a sudden he connected with Tafik a little bit better. That's the mark of a good coach. which is kind of fascinating for a guy that had never coached. And so, um, I think Deion Sanders recognizes those types of qualities in people. I think he's going to see the same thing out of Marshall Falk. And then, George Hageman, uh, you mentioned Gunnar White hasn't played a lot. George Hageman has. Andre Garrod has played a lot of football. So he's bringing in guys that have played a lot of football that then can they teach it? But these other guys, Hageman has coached, Garrod has coached, Domata Peko has coached now, and so these guys are learning how to teach the game as well, and it's kind of cool to see their growth and development as coaches.
Yeah, definitely. And I think kind of to harken back to my original point is when I talk about talent evaluators, guys who can look at a guy and know whether or not they have what it takes
Yep.
maybe to go to the next level. And if you only have a year to do that and you only have a very microwave process, then guys who can help you with little different things because they've been there and done that, that's proving to have worked so far, right?
Yeah.
Let's see how it continues to build. But yeah, I mean, overall, that's just overall. I mean, I've got so many different takeaways individually here, but I would just say there isn't there isn't a single coach on this team who I don't think is a very good guy. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there is, and there have been in the past. There have been some guys you're like, God, that guy's just kind of an asshole. Or
Yeah.
I would you really want to play for him? There isn't one of those guys on the team, and I think that's really important. And it kind of brought me back to what Coach Gerard said in his presser when Coach Prime was interviewing him. It was what were the key questions he was asking you? It was how do you relate to players? How do you plan on doing this? How do you plan on seeing them, right? And knowing that it's a lot more about the person development as well. And college football is so transactional right now. I think you have a lot of coaches out there just looking at it on a 1 year basis because as Pat Shermer brought up, it's like, they're rebuilding, they're restarting in so many ways. They're not
Yeah.
replacing these guys, they're actually rebuilding a team. And college football, we may have to think about it differently. It's less so roster development as it is team building year over year.
Yeah.
And Shermer said it best, like you're not going to have the same team any season now. It will always be different, especially
Yeah.
going about it the way that they are. So it's fascinating to see, and it's a changing environment. And yet again, Coach Prime is out on the leading edge because so far so good with the returns. Now it's a big year for everybody, certainly if you're only going to judge a program based on wins and losses. But if you take everything in the total picture, you go, I mean, everything's a massive win. As Coach Prime said the other day, they've already won. They've
Yeah.
already won with how this has worked out.
And you mentioned them being good guys, and I think one of the interesting qualities as far as bringing in pros is that and Coach Prime said it about Marshall Falk. He says, "Look, he doesn't need to do this.
No.
It's not like he needs the money. He wants to come and help me out." And I think that's one of the interesting qualities in this staff. Like um, Warren Sapp's a Hall of Famer too. Do you think he
Mm.
needs to do this? You
You
know?
know what? Actually, now that you brought that up, I was talking to a former CU player who plays pro right now. I won't bring up the name, but I had posted that clip of Coach Sapp saying that on my timeline, and they texted me with that clip and said, "Do you have any idea what it says about a person when a Hall of Famer says they're willing to show up and it's not about the money, it's just about the person?" He's
Yeah,
like, "Do you understand what that really says about who Deion Sanders is?" And, it was
yeah,
a good point that they brought up because it's a person who's had a lot of success. So it's valid when you have people that are uber successful. I mean, think about it. I mean, how many of us in our day-to-day lives go do something out of the goodness of our heart just because, we really want to? Meanwhile, we're going to drop everything. Now,
yeah,
most of us don't have the money that these guys have and the opportunities to do those types of things, but still, it wouldn't be on the top of your mind. It would have to be for something pretty special.
yeah,
And it just kind of goes to show how special the culture of what they're creating here is,
yeah,
however long they choose to continue building it.
yeah. And speaking of Warren Sapp, I mean, he mentions, look, if some of the guys tell me, hey, we want to meet at 6 a.m., he goes, I'll be there at 5:45. He'll get up early and meet you because,
You kidding? I
hey,
mean,
sure, I'll drop everything. Let's go. And he talked last year about how he was just so energized by the fact that these guys wanted to learn from him,
yeah.
and it's a guy that it seems like, and he's talked about it a little bit, that you needed some purpose in his life, after retiring from football, and and he found some purpose in coaching, and so I think that's something that Coach Prime has found in these guys as well, and uh, one of the qualities in a player is, you especially when you reach that level, is you're obviously competitive, right? And those competitive juices flow when you're a player, and when you retire, you've got to replace it somehow. And I think that that's one of the things these guys have in common, and I
Mm.
think that's why Coach Prime likes these guys, is that Kevin Mathis has found the competitiveness in coaching. Jason Phillips has found some competitiveness in coaching. Marshall Falk is maybe finding that now. Warren Sapp certainly has, and so you're finding it in that regard. And then you have that interesting mix too. Robert Livingston. He knows the game. He wasn't a player in the NFL, but he's been in the NFL a long time. Pat Shurmur as well. Then you have your Gunnar White, who, like you said, didn't play a lot, but he's a hard worker, and he's gained Coach Prime's trust. So I love the different dynamics on this staff as well. It's not all just a bunch of Hall of Famers, but I think it's a good mix of old, young, player, non-player type thing. And so I think it's a good mix. He's found a group that really works well with him.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Gunnar White one specifically the other day. I mean, Brian, this is a guy who would never fit the bill of what Coach Prime is looking for, but he did, so
Hmm.
much so that he hired him.
Yeah.
Kind of tells you all you need to know about the person that Gunnar White is, and I also feel the same about Michael Pollock,
I was just gonna say Michael Pollock. Yeah.
their new special
Hmm.
teams coordinators, right? I mean, Coach Prime is no fool. If he'll look you straight up and down into your soul to try and figure out who you are. He's done
Yeah.
it with us multiple times, right? That's just kind of who he is, which is kind of why I like him because he's trying to figure out who you are,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Hmm.
he's a no frills guy at the end of the day. Yeah, he'll window dress everything, but when it comes to figuring out who you are, there's no bullshit there with him. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that about him a lot. And I was thinking back to that the other day that I was like, okay, I mean, look, here's two guys that, quite frankly, if you were to stack their resumes up against their peers, you would be like, really?
Yeah.
But Deion Sanders has seen something in these two gentlemen that has clearly spoken to him. And no, they're not at the top of their profession. And no, they don't have some unbelievable resume. And no, they're not, their own playing careers. It's just, clearly they have made a strong impression. And I think that speaks volumes about who they are. Robert Livingston, much the same. I mean,
Yeah.
coming in last year, you and I at this point in time had no idea what to expect. Neither did anyone else about who he was. We did find out that the one thing I really like about Coach Prime is that I believe he also subscribes to the philosophy that you don't want to be the smartest person in the room because you have to acknowledge when you aren't the foremost expert on a certain topic and reach out for help, like
Yeah.
he does to Mike Zimmer. Mike Zimmer clearly recommended him Robert Livingston, and now this year recommended him Noah Peko. And
Right.
and clearly with how well it worked out with Livingston, and Livingston having had a prior relationship with Peko, that's not a Hall of Famer, but that's a guy who's a 15-year pro and balled out in the league. And again, it's kind of like who was it? I think it might have been Hegeman who said it this week or last week that if a player needs advice, they never have to wait for a coach. They never have to be in line to ask a
Hmm.
question. They never have to be, not a priority. There's three different guys, and you can go to them, and everybody's on the same page. And I think it's a really good environment that they've built up there. Now it just comes the team building year after year
Yeah.
after year.
Yeah, and to that last point, with the offensive line in particular, you got three guys there. Guys, players respond to different types of coaching, and so that's what I like about this trio is Gunnar White might coach them very differently than Andre Garrod or George Hageman, and so player might respond better to what Gunnar White's saying, his message and how he says it,
Mm,
as opposed to him responding to Andre Garrod, or or Jordan Seaton might really get
sure.
along with George Hageman, and he doesn't quite mesh well with Gunnar White, but he meshes with George Hageman. I'm
Right.
not saying that's the case. I'm just saying that it's a possible
Right.
example. So, but I mean,
Yeah.
guys learn differently. When you have 16, 17 guys in a room, I think it's good to have three different voices all delivering the same message, but they might deliver it in a different way.
100%. 100%. There's specific things, specific takeaways from every coach that we could get into. Certainly, I have tons of them. Um, Cool to see Robert Livingston back. You know, this is a guy that we've told you on this podcast. It would have had to be his dream job to leave this year.
Mhm.
And so I'm sure the Saints probably made him an offer. I mean, I'd be surprised if they didn't, quite frankly. He at least
Yeah.
interviewed and maybe he's just getting into the process and getting his feet wet. But here's a guy who is now the highest paid assistant in University of Colorado football history. We're talking about what, Brian, over 120 years? I mean,
Yeah.
more than that at this point, right? I
Yeah.
mean, significantly. So we're talking about obviously.
There was certainly nobody back in 1890 that was making
I
more
say
than
that
Robert Livingston.
hyperbolically. I think we all understand that. But the point is he even brought it up. You know, he was the stray dog on the side of the road. They gave a chance
Yeah.
to, and in a year's time, look at what he's become. So it's a very inclusive culture. It's a culture that prioritizes business first.
Hmm.
But they know how to do business in that, yeah, we can market ourselves, we can have some flash to it, but we're getting work done at the same time.
Yeah.
Everybody's still locked in and focused. And look, across the country, here comes the year of figuring out if it's sustainable and tangible, right? Like
Hmm.
one of the questions that I'm going to ask Coach Prime the next time we get an opportunity to speak with him, because I haven't heard him talk about it yet, and maybe, God hasn't given him the message, which is normally what he says, but year one was the year of hope, right? Year two was the year of expectation. How does he see this year?
Yeah.
To me, it's the year of retooling a little bit, right? I don't know if it's a full rebuild, but it definitely is a retool in some ways because you change how you play. Now that being said, I didn't get the impression from Pat Shermer that they're going to want to do much differently offensively. He kind of talked about everybody having a year time on task in the offense. He wasn't talking about having to uproot the system and do things a ton differently. It's
Yeah.
probably going to look different in execution. So it's about getting comfortable in yet another year and based upon the rapid growth that we not only saw over the course of last year, but midseason, there are tons of things to be encouraged by.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think it's exciting. I think there's a lot to be excited about with this team. I don't know how good they're going to be yet. I mean, this team's not done being built,
No,
right?
no.
And so I'm not going to give any predictions at this point because I think there's guys that are going to make an impact in the fall that aren't even here yet, and so I think it's a little bit too early to do that. Certainly, I'm in the camp that thinks. I don't know. I don't believe they're going to be better than they were last year when you lose a Shador and you lose a Travis. But with this coaching staff and Coach Prime thinks they're going to be better, I'm not going to put it past him. I mean, it certainly wouldn't surprise me because usually what Coach Prime has told us has come about. And so if they wind up being better, I won't be surprised. But it and part of it is what we're talking about, Matt, with all these coaches. And I think he's brought in a staff that can help this team that may not on paper look better than last year, but this staff might be an X factor into making them as good or better than last year.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I asked Coach Prime the other day because I didn't get a chance to ask him at the end of the year was about offseason priorities. And he said they're basically the same as last year,
Yeah,
running the ball and stopping the run, certainly priorities. But he said he went about it in a different way in that he felt like, or he had learned from the first year that you can't just change the personnel and expect it to be better.
yeah,
You need to marry that with coaching in certain situations. So while I believe that others took jobs, like Coach Lodeholt, he got a job at Mississippi State. Great, good for you. Was Coach Prime upset that he left? Probably not. If I'm
yeah,
going to be honest with you, because of the production of last year, and as God, God, it was one of the coaches we spoke to. We spoke to like 8 of them, so I don't remember exactly who. But somebody said or maybe it was Falk. He said that Coach Prime wants to win now, so just
yeah,
don't have a lot of time to figure it out, and you know that coming
hmm,
into it. So for
yeah,
Coach Prime, let me marry the staff with the personnel changes and make sure that everything's right because we changed the personnel from year over year, but it really didn't make a difference,
yeah,
specifically in the running back room. Well, now we'll make a bigger shift and we'll get really serious about it. I hope, and we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah, he's learning, Brian. I mean,
hmm,
as much as at the beginning, at the outset, he didn't want to acknowledge that this was a step up in levels. That whole first year, he refused to acknowledge that it's a more competitive level, it's a stronger level. Like he completely refused to, as to highlight HBCU culture and the fact that it shouldn't be thought of as less than, which I think everybody appreciates. But the truth is, we all have eyes and brains and understand guys are bigger, faster, stronger at this level. The game is
Yeah.
just different. That's just the truth. And it's not to take anything away from it. It's just a fact of life. It's science. So what I've seen from him is growth year over year, learning, being humble about some of that, and going, hey, if I made a mistake here, I'm not going to sit there, dig my heels in. The fastest way to to right that wrong is to correct that mistake.
Yeah.
And that takes a lot of humility as well, because I think there's a lot of coaches who stick to their guns, are kind of arrogant hotheads, who don't really have the emotional depth to think through some of that stuff. And look, does it mean that it's going to work for everybody? No. But in a situation where so many people thought at this stage he would not be here, it's working for him.
Yeah. And he's made some good hires. He's made some that didn't work out quite as well, but I like the fact that he moves on quickly. He's not a coach that's gonna be loyal to a friend just to be loyal to a friend. He's gonna like, look, this isn't working out, so we got to move on. And I got to get somebody in here. And you mentioned with Phil Loholt, was he upset that he left? Probably not. Um, I think with Coach Prime too, I'm not sure he's upset if anybody's left because I think he's so confident that he'll find somebody that's as good or better as a
Sure.
replacement because he's got such a huge network of contacts and people he knows and people he trusts that it's like, hey, uh, Nick Williams, we were talking about Syracuse early. Nick Williams is at Syracuse. My guess is that he wasn't that upset about Nick Williams because it's like, hey, you're growing and elevating as a coach. Awesome, go.
Sure.
Vincent Dancy this offseason, like Mississippi is home, so he goes back to Mississippi State. He's probably like, yeah, great, go home. That's fine with me. He goes and gets somebody that he trusts as well. So I think Coach Prime has got enough confidence and contacts. He's like, yeah, whatever. I like these guys, but I'm fine. I got guys that can replace them.
Absolutely. I mean, he's always conducted himself that way, and there's no reason to think. I think you understood what I meant, though, right? I
Yeah,
mean, that it
yeah,
wouldn't be a massive loss to them one way or another.
correct. Yeah,
Obviously he supports his guys. I think that goes without saying. But as far as his program, now it's again, this is the third act, the second act, however you want to describe it. But you
yeah.
move forward. Um,
Well,
a
I think
couple,
I think
yeah, go ahead.
sort of your point is if that offensive line last year had been one of the best in the Big 12, you're rolling out some
Losing
cash.
Robert Livingston would have felt different.
Yes, and if that offensive line was phenomenal last year, I think that you see Phil Loholt stay here with a pretty big raise.
And one other thing I want to bring up while we're just talking about broad strokes, maybe we'll talk a little bit later this week if you want to and talk like individual takeaways because I got
Yeah,
like a bunch of like detail stuff. And since it's a bye week, might even be a good idea to
let's
do
do
that.
that. Yeah,
Um, but from a broad strokes perspective, one thing that I wrote down, I went back and re-listened to a lot of these because sometimes in the moment you miss things, and just sometimes I'll be, the other day I was doing some yard work and I just threw on, the pressers to just go, hey, did I miss this? Did I miss that? What didn't I catch? And
yeah,
the one thing that I'm thinking about is as a player, if you have if you're grounded and you have a good head on your shoulders, if you come here he has created an atmosphere where, as a student athlete, you will learn so much more, even off the field, than you would in so many other programs because they highlight it and they care about it, right?
yeah.
Maybe he doesn't have the Syracuse and 60 pledge that Coach Fran Brown has, but I can guarantee you, if you're a former player of Coach Prime and you call them and you said, "Hey, anything you could do to help me get into X, Y, or Z profession," I promise you, he would make a phone call to put you in
Hmm.
touch with somebody that could help you there.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of coaches that don't do that, like that
yeah,
just won't be bothered to do that. So as a parent, if you were going to send your child off out of state to, go learn from strangers and really develop them as a man, there are so many things that just being a sponge in this program, you're around such good. I come back to high character, good people, great role models, people who've done it the right way, people who have had very little and now have a lot and know what that feels like, and people who have had experiences all in between. And
yeah,
so, like I think of a guy again. We'll go back to the O line room, and we could even look at the D line room with George Hilo and Coach Sapp and Domata Peko. But O line room, right? Like you're going to learn different things from Gunnar White and from a different experience and a whole different set of life experience than you are going to from George Hegeman, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
Andre Giroud, right? Like it's going to be a completely different experience than you would get it in a different place because you're around very highly successful people. So if you pay attention, and this is something that we've talked about, and it's kind of why everybody, kind of threw their arms up. And I guess I'll bring it back to Cormani because he's just the one example, even though there are others, he's the most high profile.
Yeah.
If you show up and you do what they tell you, you're gonna have success if you have the tools.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I don't really know how else to say it. Now there are other coaching staffs and coaches that I know of personally and can think of where I go, that's not the case. It's the case
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
That's the case here. And we have a sample size now, and that speaks volumes to the coach that Coach Prime is and the talent
Yeah.
evaluator that he is as well.
Absolutely. And I think I like your idea. We'll do another podcast later this week. We'll talk more individually about these coaches, but I do want to say one other quick thing. And to your point is Marshall Falk even mentioned it. He's like, look, he goes, Coach Prime talks more about these kids' academics and things like that than he does football with me. And when the report came out, I think it was last month about academics and CU setting records academically with GPA, and the football has the best GPA they've ever had. I was talking to their academic coordinator. I was like, no, come on, now tell me about Coach Prime. Like, we've heard this from coaches before that they're on academics,
Right.
things like that. Like, how does he compare to, you know, things in the coaches in the past? And she goes, I'm telling you right now, he's the real deal. He walks the walk. He talks the talk, but he walks the walk when it comes to academics. And
Oh yeah.
nationally, people would not believe that with Coach Prime when it comes to that. But I'm telling you, like, she's like, he walks the walk and he is on them all the time. And she gave me a story. She goes, she goes, one day I brought in the report, the grade report, and it was in the middle of a meeting. And I kind of slipped it to him, and she's like, I figured that he would not look at it until after the meeting, but I just wanted to give it to him. And she went back to her office, and she goes, I heard that within 5 minutes of that meeting ending, there were already players lined up at his office that he had contacted and said, come talk to me about your grades, because he couldn't wait to look at it and figure out who needed to be talked to and say, hey, get on task, things like that. So he he
100%.
he talks about it seriously. But Matt, we're gonna have plenty more to talk about. Let's get together later on this week. We'll talk more individually about some of these coaches. And yeah, today was fun. Spring game, we'll see what happens with that, but some good takeaways with the coaches as well.
Yeah, absolutely, buddy. And the last thing, just kind of to dot the I there of your point that I think at this stage, if you don't realize that Coach Prime's a genuine human being who puts these players' lives, as a priority over everything else, then you just really aren't paying attention. And honestly,
Yeah,
we don't really need to be paying attention to you. And that's not speaking as a homer, speaking from a biased perspective. That's just the truth,
yeah,
right? I mean, he's shown us time and time again that the football, well, yeah, that's why you're here. And that's certainly what's motivating you. And that's your goals, your dreams. But his top priority is not the football. And
yeah,
it's about developing successful young men in whatever it looks like through the game of football. And
yeah,
and that is that's indisputable. Nobody could knock him for that. And if you still are at this point, I mean, start playing a different note because that
yeah.
that one is I've heard that one before.
Awesome. Well, good stuff, Matt. We'll get together later this week. We'll talk more about some of these coaches and get ready for the next few weeks of spring ball.
All right, buddy. Talk to you soon.